Hey, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of the Patriotic Populist. And with me is my co host, Herschell Miller. Say hi, Herschell.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Nevin.
Good to have you again. And with us is a guest, my longtime friend, Alan Hahn. Alan Hahn is the founder of the National Democracy Party, which was formed, I believe, back in about 2011 or 2012. It is a political based Facebook group where all kinds of articles and discussions are held regarding economics, politics, domestic politics, and national security. Um, and Alan has been active in a variety of organizations, especially ones that deal with reforming our free trade policy, most notably the Coalition for Prosperous America. And Alan and I did some work together in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago, fighting the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a huge battle in the waning years of the Obama administration. One of those examples of where it was an unholy alliance between the corporate Democrats and your sort of corporate Republicans, including some Tea Party Republicans, not all of them. So, Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. So, Alan, tell us and tell the audience, how did you get interested in politics? And you could start, I guess, by explaining where you grew up, the circumstances you grew up in economically, and whatnot.
Yeah, so I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit in the 80s and 90s and went to college in the early 2000s. Okay, so even then, it was really still a very industrial place. Okay, my father sold advertising for the old Thomas Register. It was big green books of advertising of manufacturers to other manufacturers, basically. Okay, so I knew from an early age really how important industry and manufacturing is for the economy, because it really was the whole economy where I come from. Okay, I mean, even if you weren't working on an assembly line, there were people working for the big three in their offices. I've had family members who worked in the offices of various auto companies over the years. Okay, so really, starting with NAFTA and continuing into the 2000s under the World Trade Organization, a lot of that industry just died. Okay, and not just the auto manufacturing. I mean, there was a lot of other industry in Michigan, and it all just disappeared practically overnight. Whether it was going to Mexico or further south in Central America from there, or to China, it just disappeared. Okay, and with it, the economy tanked. So even like, I moved to Arizona in 2008, and it was late 2008 when, the Great Recession, as they called it, started. That you already couldn't find a job in Michigan. Okay, it had already, for years, there wasn't jobs to be had for anybody. Okay, so that's kind of where I come from and why I think manufacturing and better trade policies are so important. Okay, I didn't really come to politics until, like Nevin said, about 2011. It was the Obama administration, and Obama had come in on the idea of hope and change, and then in 2010, the Republicans seized control of Congress with their Tea Party revolution. And so, here I had really grown up as, I guess, what you would have called a labor Democrat, which is, I believed in the Democratic Party, but mostly coming from an organized labor standpoint, because, that's just how I was raised, I guess. And gradually I had come to realize that there was no such thing as a labor Democrat for a long time, starting, with Clinton's third way, and his embrace of NAFTA and the WTO, the Democratic Party had long abandoned organized labor and working Americans. Okay? And so in 2010, 2011, when people calling themselves the Tea Party with a lot of libertarian bend had kind of hijacked the Republican Party, I felt that there was nowhere for someone like me to go. Okay? I didn't leave the Democratic Party, they left me, and I couldn't truck with Republicans who felt that government was evil and that outsourcing was just creative destruction, as Mitt Romney would have called it, you know. So there was just nowhere for someone like me to go, which was, you know, manufacturing and industry and smart trade policies built the middle class in this country, supported the middle class, and like, okay, I went to college, I'm an engineer, but not everybody can go to college, not everybody should go to college, and you should be able to earn a living wage even if you don't go to college. And at the same time, these trade policies had taken a totalitarian state in the form of China and made it into a world power bent on dominating the world. So, you know, I had no allegiance to any of these major parties. Neither one of them really represented anything that I believed in. And it felt to me that there were probably a lot of people that agreed. Okay? Even people within the parties themselves, like organized labor in the Democratic Party and actual nationalists within the Republican Party. So the idea was to try to get these ideas out there and say, hey, you know, this is what's wrong in Washington. This is a better way to do it. And the idea was, you know, start to build an organization, which I knew, you know, you can't build a grassroots third party into something that can take on the Republicans and the Democrats. Okay, I knew that. There's just no realism to that. But in looking at other third parties, I had seen that there was a lot of overlapping ideologies, and the idea was to one day, you know, build enough of an organization to try to convince those other third parties with similar ideologies to create a larger single organization that could pull support from the Democratic and Republican parties from members that were dissatisfied with the policies that both sides seemed to agree on, which was unrestricted free trade, the weakening of our country, and the strengthening of our enemies to make a buck, you know? And so it wasn't really, you know, I find myself in between the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's not that I think, oh, you know, a third party should be somebody who splits the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. It's somebody who approaches the problems from a different way and can attract members from both sides. Because the reality is that our political system is badly broken. Okay, so if you look at the maps of congressional districts across the country, they're all gerrymandered beyond all recognition. I mean, you look at the lines in these districts and you can tell that, you know, nobody is going to win other than the party that drew those lines, okay? And so you can't come in and just try to split the difference. You had to come up with something that worked, but could appeal to people from the party that you were trying to beat in those districts, okay? A Democrat can't win in a red district. A Republican can't win in a blue district. Both sides have drawn it that way for their own interests, and you had to do something different. Now, that was 10 years ago. And for a few years, it went pretty well. I mean, I found a lot of like-minded people like Nevin and made a lot of contacts with other third parties. And then came 2016. And so When
Can I
Donald
can I
Trump,
just interject? Can I interject
yeah,
one thing? The National Democracy Party, which is a page on Facebook, has almost 600 people,
yeah,
562 likes or people following them. So it has a considerable following, given
oh
that
yeah,
it's not a well-financed group. Like some of the other. No, I don't mean that as a pejorative or to be rude. It's
right.
just it's an accomplishment because 562 people at least, if not more, are educated and are get useful news that they don't hear in the mainstream media. But I wanted to interject that there to kind of give the audience an idea of how many people are following the NDP to this day. But continue regarding 2016. So 2016 rolls around the corner.
Yeah.
So what does Alan Hahn think about 2016?
Well, things got a lot harder. Okay. And the biggest issue was Donald Trump. Okay. He's a very divisive person, and everybody seemed to either love him or hate him.
And so it wasn't his, poofy hair that looks like a bird nest. So that wasn't the issue.
It was his polarizing personality. And so the issue became, to me, trying to appeal to both sides. Okay. And I mean elements of both sides, because the only way to make anything kind of difference was to unite people from the different sides on things they could agree on. Okay. And so, like, when it comes to trade, you can convince environmentalists that free trade is bad, because where do these jobs go? They go to places, these factories are going to places with no environmental regulation. You're worried about climate change, you're worried about pollution. Sending jobs to China or Vietnam or the Philippines isn't the answer. It may make it seem like you've got a cleaner environment locally for now, but ultimately it makes the problem worse. You can appeal to organized labor on the terms that, these jobs are going to very low wage countries, and American workers can't compete with that, because you want to make a living wage and be able to live in this country. You can't compete with somebody in China. You just can't. And you can appeal to people from the Republican Party that are strong on national defense, because all of this money and all of these jobs are going to China, which is absolutely our largest geopolitical competitor at this time. Okay. But when Donald Trump burst onto the scene as an actual candidate and was actually winning in the primaries and ultimately in the general election, it became very difficult, because you go and you say something like, we should put tariffs on Chinese imports or stop trading with China altogether, and you get these never Trumpers who are like, oh, well, you're supporting Donald Trump and I have to go. Okay. So I lost people from our organization because of that. Like, well, it seems like you're supporting Donald Trump because you're on the same political side on this issue, so I can't be part of that. Or, you point out that any of his many flaws, and people who are diehard supporters of him because of whatever reason, because of the policies he was advocating, don't support you anymore. Okay. So it was a lot harder to try to play against both sides than it was during the Obama years, because there was just less polarization. So I'm hoping now that we have changed administrations back into the Biden administration, and a lot of the people who may have supported him or opposed Trump just because of who Trump was may again start to see that Joe Biden and the people running the Democratic Party aren't really going to be helping American workers anytime soon. The Democrats talk a good game, but ultimately, you can talk about $15 minimum wage all you want, but if there are no jobs, there's nobody paying $15 minimum wage. Okay. We've gone from GM being the largest employer in this country to Walmart being the largest employer in this country. And yeah, $15 minimum wage will somewhat help to address that, it's not going to really put a dent in income inequality because everything's still made in China. The majority of the jobs are still in low-wage countries, which means higher profits for the rich and less opportunity for the rest of us.
Well, and I think a lot of this, before I turn to Herschel, because I'm sure Herschel has some questions, but I thought trade was a big part of the problem, and it is to a large degree, but really trade is only the tip of the tentacle. What really it comes down to is this notion of, as propounded by Michael Jensen and Milton Friedman and others, of shareholder supremacy, or shareholder value being the be end and all of economic policy and corporate governance. And this is where we're going to have a reconfigured political system, a reconfigured government. I've recently termed it on the Patriotic Populist Facebook page, fourth positionism or radical civic nationalism. That's ultimately is going to have to tackle that. And that is really, in my opinion, the chief culprit. That, and also a foreign policy strategy which started during the Cold War and continued afterwards, TPP, the reinvigoration of the TPP as being part of it, using free trade, so-called free trade, as a strategy of containing our adversaries, whether first the Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact, and China during the Cold War, and then during the so-called post-Cold War era, using the TPP to allegedly contain China, even though the Obama administration said, well, John Kerry said this on Mir TV, that, we'll let Russia and China eventually in the TPP, or Obama administration officials saying, well, TPP really isn't an anti-China strategy. And after all, China uses their ally, or somewhat of an ally, somewhat of an enemy, communist Vietnam, as a means of evading American export controls and existing tariffs. They'll just ship the products to Vietnam and re-export them into the American market. So, this is the two things we have to tackle. And even during the Cold War, a lot of our NATO allies, West Germany, Italy, France, and Japan, big offenders. Those are some really big offenders, despite their adherence to the NATO allies and America slowly opening its markets to especially Japanese goods. Well, Japan was sending all this technology to the Soviet Union, East Germany, North Korea, Vietnam a little bit during the Vietnam War. Japan sold military barbed wire in 1966, as reported by our own CIA. So, this strategy of just totally surrendering our sovereignty to other nations, however, quote, allied, is really a failed strategy. So this is at the heart, the structural heart of the problem. And that needs to be partially, if not fully, re-examined and ultimately perhaps eviscerated from American policy. But I wanted to give Herschel the opportunity to throw some questions out there, because Alan said quite a lot of very good points, a good backstory. Herschel, what do you have to say?
So I've got a couple of questions, but I'll go ahead and just start with the first one because I believe it's probably the most pertinent at this point. So you talked a little bit about that you realized that the Democrats were not going to be realistically helpful anytime in the near future. So, well, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say, I got something I want to say first, but what was the moment that the light bulb went off in your head, per se, and you thought, these are a bunch of liars, or they're just the same as the Republican Party at the end of the day on labor, some variation of that. For me, right after my exit from the Republican Party, I was watching a documentary about Bill Clinton, and it was talking about NAFTA, the run up, all of the confluence of events that led us to NAFTA. And there was a campaign by Bill Clinton and his administration to assure labor unions and American workers that this trade deal would not negatively impact their lives, that American manufacturing would still remain strong, and that the like the UAW wouldn't see a decrease in its membership. But in private, he knew he was lying.
Okay.
And his whole administration knew he was lying. But it was such a callous way that he went on national TV. I mean, obviously, Bill Clinton isn't the most trustworthy man on national TV, but, he went on this big campaign of saying over and over again that NAFTA will be great for American workers. NAFTA will be great for American consumers. But here's something that's terrifying to me to think about. Not only is it decimated American manufacturing and most of the middle class, which was already hanging on by a thread in the first place, it has negatively affected Mexico in an extreme way. It has driven the price of labor extremely down in Mexico, which before NAFTA was trending upwards to not on parity with the United States, obviously, but it was becoming a better place for workers in Mexico. So for me, that was what broke me from the Democratic Party, because I said, look, these dudes are a bunch of fucking liars. like, I just can't do this in good faith. And that's kind of what led me to starting the USNP when I did. Kind of in the same vein of you.
Yeah.
Realizing that there was nobody that really fit my views. So I thought, well, hell, I'll just give it a shot. Now, obviously, the USNP is a defunct party, and I think we're all the better for it. But, I got to meet a guy like Nevin here and eventually got to meet you. So this has been a pretty good run for me. But not to go off on too many tangents, what was that moment for you?
It was something that had been forming, okay? Really, the break was the 2008 campaign, okay? You have Barack Obama walking around holding a book called The Post-American World, okay, by Fareed Zakaria. So I've read this book, and it basically, upon reading it, made the Obama administration make so much more sense. Okay? It basically highlighted how sending jobs to China wasn't a problem because they were all low-wage jobs to begin with. Well, okay, that's patently false because, yeah, they're low-wage jobs in China, but they weren't low-wage jobs here. Okay? Second, it went on about how China wasn't really a threat to the United States. They wanted to work within the existing order. And so when you see Barack Obama at the very early part of his administration saying that he wanted to work with China and help them move into this greater role in the world and have a positive effect on the world, I mean, you only had to look at history in China to see that this position had no basis in reality. Okay, it was, I mean, these are people who ran their own people over with tanks. You don't go from that in 1989 in 30 years to having a positive impact on anybody. Okay, especially since nothing had fundamentally changed with the Chinese Communist Party in that time. And it came down to, reading these things and say, Zakaria talks about how American companies are moving jobs to Canada because Canada provides socialized medicine and they don't have to provide insurance for their workers. Okay, so you read this book and you see everything that Obama tried to achieve in the first 2 years when he had a Democratic majority controlling Congress. And you can see that it wasn't really going to fix anything. It really, this person who ran on changing things and making things better for regular Americans wasn't going to try to bring the jobs back. It was like, oh, this party that I've really supported all my life, and I wasn't that old in 2008, I was, 24, really doesn't represent me. I have pretty strong national defense views. I don't view China as our friend, and there's this guy who's like, well, China's great and amazing, so it really was, I can't be with the Democrats, and then because they aren't going to represent anything I believe anymore, And you go to the Republicans, and they didn't represent me either. And it really was 2008 was really the break point for me from, I can't be part of this party anymore.
Well, here's one for y'all. And I want Nevin's opinion on this too, because this is a question that I have rolled around, which is probably the most important question for all of us, is do any of us believe that we can fundamentally change the direction, or at least, maybe not us per se, but as in populism will become more prevalent in either of the two major parties? For me, I'm still young and optimistic, and it has its benefits. I'm not near as nihilistic as somebody that's been in this a long time, but even I know that there's limits to what's possible. And I will say that I've had my serious doubts that the Democrats are not going to change because they don't have to. They can get a good percentage of the working class simply off of the fact that they're not the Republican Party.
Yep.
And they don't have to do anything else. And you've seen that this last time with Joe Biden. Joe Biden was not the worst candidate in U.S. political history, and not even the worst candidate in modern U.S. political history. But he was up there among the most milquetoast, plain white rice presidential candidates I think I've ever seen in my life. And he won the largest number of votes in U.S. history. Now, and I've made our position clear over and over again. Joe Biden legally won the election. I'm not going to, and I'll say that. Now, look, I've heard Trump supporters scream it from the rooftops. And I have always said that if there is a substantial enough evidence, or if a substantial source of evidence was to come out about that, I might consider changing my position. But at this moment, Joe Biden legally won the election by at least a fair margin. Maybe you talk about 100,000 false votes either way. That's just a normal election, I figure. But he didn't gain 7 million fake votes.
No.
Okay. But for me, the Democratic Party is never going to change because it doesn't have to. There's no outside force pressing the Democratic Party to become more populist minded. So it'll kind of remain in its little crypto corporate bubble, masquerading itself as a party for the people. The Republican Party, as funny as it sounds, is the one that I do have the most faith in. Now, obviously, right now, with the cult of Trump, as strong as it is in the Republican Party's base, I don't see a realistic future within, say, like next decade or so. I don't think that that's going to be a real possibility, because although Trump definitely pushed the Republican base in a more populist direction, his brand of populism is definitely different than ours. He was still in practice a small government conservative in a lot. Yes, he and I've said this before, I really like Trump's trade policies with China. Like, I absolutely 100%. In fact, I don't think Trump went far enough. That was my biggest one of my biggest
Me too. But there are a lot of reasons for that, I think.
Yeah, like, I am a person that believes in a clean break from China, that we simply cannot continue to trade with somebody. I hate to say, because everybody uses Nazi Germany as a weapon in every political debate, so I'm going to try to stay away from that. But it is trading with Benito's Italy right before the war starts. They are an enemy that is looking to expand their territory, that is looking to gain prominence on the world stage. Now, yeah, Italy was never in a position to challenge the United States, Great Britain, or anybody else, but they were still gearing up for a war. Maybe it could have been against Nazi Germany. Maybe it could have been against, well, it turned out to be against the Allies. Nobody really knew until Benito, made his last decision, as eclectic as it was. But we're trading with our enemy.
Yeah.
But to the point, though, I believe that the Republican Party has a better chance of moving our direction than the Democratic. And we're talking about the establishment, of course, here, because the base is the base. Both sides are about as populist as you can get at this point. I mean, I've seen polling the other day that, was it 70-something% of Americans supported the stimulus checks. The number of people that support Medicare for all is now well above 60%. A whole cadre of populist ideas are not just above the 50% mark, but now trending to a complete majority. So I guess I'd start with Alan since he's our guest. But Alan, what's your thoughts on all this?
So I think politics is like a pendulum. Okay, it swings one way and then it swings another. In the 30s, in the wake of the stock market crash in the middle of the Great Depression, it swung towards the populism. Okay, and New Deal Democrats dominated the politics of this country for 40 years. Okay, and after significant and organized resistance from the wealthy and corporations, starting in the 70s and even into the 60s, the pendulum started to tip and swing back the other way. Okay, where it was, trickle down economics, as Nevin would love to refer to Ronald Reagan here, and globalization, and all of these things became mainstream and powerful and, well, maybe not popular. They became the law of the land. So, I've been doing this now 10 years. And when I came in, I didn't think, I'm like, there have got to be a lot of people out there who think like I do and agree with me on things, but they certainly didn't have a voice anywhere. Okay. At least not, you look at Bernie Sanders and he said a lot of things that I would agree with, while saying some things I wouldn't agree with. But, that's one voice out of, 535 in Congress and how many state legislators in the White House. Okay. Over the last 10 years, I've seen a significant resurgence in real populist positions becoming more mainstream. And what I think it really is we're in the middle of a reorganization. Okay, so, to give an example, a lot of people, when they're Republicans trying to score points off of Democrats, will like to point out that Democrats were the Confederacy. They were the ones that seceded from the Union. They were the slaveholders. They were the party of Jim Crow. Okay, and then every Democrat will tell you, oh, well, the parties have switched. The GOP is the party of, slaveholders now, when the Democrats are the party of the people. Okay, obviously that's, a very simplified view of things, but I think we really are in the middle of another major reorganization of American politics, which is a change of who is the party of the corporations, who is the party of the rich, and who is the party of the people and the party of populist positions. So you can already see it with corporations coming down in support of the Democratic Party. They're not doing that because, they believe in whatever they're spewing. They're doing it because they think there's something to gain. Okay. The Democrats are in control in Washington. They are in control in the White House. And the corporations think that if they look like they're Democrat enough, they can get the Democrats to do what they want. Okay. And, you're, like you said, Trump did, at least talk about populist positions. And so if you look at the same polling from the 2020 election, you'll see that where the Democrats won and made gains is the suburbs, and where they've lost is with working class voters. Okay. So, yeah. And the Republican Party is not a populist party. Okay. It was, as Pat Toomey said when he hijacked Trump's tax cuts and turned it into a giveaway for billionaires, we are not a populist party. Okay. They aren't. But I agree with you that I'm seeing a lot of reason to believe that they might be in the future. Okay. You can talk about Mitch McConnell and how he's never going to allow that to happen. Mitch McConnell is the Koch brothers, or the Koch brother who's left, whipping boy, but he won't be around forever any more than, Nancy Pelosi's going to be around forever, or Chuck Schumer. Okay. So I think that's what we're seeing, is that we are going to see a shift to, and Trump was a very bad person to try to sell it. Okay. Donald Trump is about Donald Trump. You get this cult of personality because that's what he wanted. Okay. He was not good at communicating why the things he proposed were important. So, we talked about it a little before the call, how like Sherrod Brown and Bernie Sanders supported his tariffs on China, but he was just such a toxic person that he couldn't bring people over to his side, even if they agreed with him on things. Okay. But I think at the same time, he has invigorated a number of populists in the Republican Party to become more vocal. Now, the Republican Party is kind of in a free fall, I think, if you look at what's going on with the party and the infighting. But I am at least hopeful that what comes out of it will be something that cares about working people, can communicate why working people are important and why things like tariffs on China or just not trading with China at all are good policy, when a corporate controlled media is going to just try to eviscerate everything that they do. So I'm hopeful that the Republicans can become a populist party. I am hopeful we're in the midst of this big reorganization, but only time will tell.
Well, yeah, I think these are both excellent points you're bringing up. I mean, a couple of comments I want to add. Do I see a populist future for the United States? I mean, honestly, is watching politics really ever since I started to get interested in politics, thanks to my mom and my stepfather back in the end of the late 1980s when the Cold War was still technically on. And just watching things unfold, and I have been involved in Republican Party politics in the past in some ways, as Alan knows, and Herschell is aware. Alan, you intimately know. And I have to say, public opinion across party lines, including independents, indeed shows support for populist policies, whether trade, whether health insurance, meaning Medicare for all, whether polls on the legitimacy of labor union organizing, all across campaign finance reform, anti-lobbying efforts, all across the board shows support for the populist side, including also legitimate non-interventionism throughout the world, where we have troops all over the world, pretty much, and costing $5 to $6 trillion in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq alone. So that is the good news, and I think it's going to continue to favor us. The bad news is the political establishment and the plutocratic oligarchs behind them that control them are the problem. And that's why you have gerrymandering. That's why you have union organizing being killed all over the country. You have this elite consensus of neoliberal market fundamentalism, and they're going to protect it at all costs. They are playing for keeps. So that is the biggest impediment. And eventually, the ruling economic, political elites, including the media elites, that power will have to get broken. And the only way I can see that happening, and I don't want this to happen, but I think it's inevitable, there's going to be a major economic crash. Our system is not sustainable. Our corporate-dominated trickle-down economics, globalization, importing basically foreign people who are underpaid but work very hard like slaves, all of that is right to work, all of that is going to come crashing down. The party is going to be over for Wall Street. And Russia and China are gearing up for war. They've been doing that ever since. This is where I agree strongly with analysts like Jeff Nyquist and others who document meticulously that Russia and China, the Cold War has not ended. China is still openly communist. They have used the playbook of Lenin's new economic policy explicitly, and I talk about it in my books, explicitly to reinvigorate their economy, their industrial base, their war machine. Russia, you have the same old Soviet era nomenclaturist Many secretly adhere to communism. Putin has said that several times, that he still likes communist ideas. He's basically still a communist. And you have American communist personalities supported by Russia on RT, Caleb Maupin, for example, for starters. The list goes on and on and on. So we're going to have a military debacle. The United States is really not a unique country, not a united country. You look at what happened with COVID. You would think that, and a part of me believes with some evidence that it was either a leaked Chinese biological weapon or a purposeful attack. And there are some retired military officers, from a colonel to a general, who I'm friends with on Facebook. I privately asked them their thoughts. These are sober personalities. I'm not going to mention their names because it's private correspondence. I can mention it to you off air, their names, because I trust you. But their intelligence and their sources and experience tells them it was a bioweapon, either accidentally or purposefully released. This is serious. And the way the Trump administration handled it, Peter Navarro was the biggest hero, the unsung hero, one of the few people in the Trump administration that wasn't a teabagger, piece of crap, or corrupt oligarch, frankly. Was really the hero that tried to get things going with trying to reshore pharmaceutical and PPE production as best as he could and everything else. But the Trump administration handled it in a very dismal fashion. Really bad. He could have used that as an FDR moment to unite the country, tell everyone to wear the mask, get tested, get those stimulus checks going, other than a one-time payment, which, thanks to Nancy Pelosi, the friend of the people, put all of these caps and restrictions on, even though $100,000 in Podunk, North Dakota is different than earning $100,000 in Miami and New York City, and California, but that must have left Nancy Pelosi's brain, like everything else. But there was no leadership. Trump is not that. A nationalist requires leadership. You step up as a leader and say, stop the shit. The country is hurting. People are hurting. Get those frickin' checks running, Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, or I'm going to embarrass your asses on Twitter. But all Trump could do is do this bullshit owning the libs on Twitter. And this is why I abandoned support for Trump. So I look at what's going on. You get the anti-mask protesters burning masks and, these super spreader events, no social distancing, Trump encouraging this. That's not leadership. I mean, when China and Russia invades, what are these teabaggers gonna, just burn their guns or something like that, or say, oh, let's surrender because I don't want to submit to big government in a wartime emergency? And then the communists on the other side, well, you know what they're going to do. They're going to be like, joining them and killing us all and butchering them like the bunch of Bolshevik murderers that they are. So it's like, we're in deep doo-doo. This country has so much potential, human potential. A lot of people are on our side on a lot of issues. The thing is, what we have to do first is start having these podcasts, trying getting people on board, giving people different points of view. And there are a lot of podcasts like us, others much more successful. I mean, Cigar and Jetty and Crystal Balls Rising, one of the few intelligent political shows out there, or in some ways Kyle Kulinski's Secular Talk, although he's not so great on foreign policy, in my opinion, and I say that respectfully, or people like Endernax, for example. Jeff Nyquist is good on national security issues, but I have very vigorous disagreements with him on political theory and domestic policies. But they're out there, and we have to start sowing the seeds now and educating people. And I'm hoping by attrition, even if it takes a generation or two, during our lifetimes or after our lifetimes and our children's lifetime, that things will change. But I think we're going to have to go through a massive amount of pain, a plethora of pain to wake us up, because we are a society that's predicated on surviving, on starting families. Because of trickle-down Reaganomics, union-busting, globalization, the whole cacophony of crappy economic policies, we have been put in a position where everybody has to survive. I mean, you take a look at articles, you have people, good people on the right, like journalists like Jerome Corsi and others on the left that have pointed out college kids got to sell their bodies, particularly women, 20-some-odd-year-olds, have to sell themselves on websites to pay for college. Where's Ben Shapiro talking about that immorality? But no, people like him, we can't confront corporate capitalism. So the political establishment has betrayed this country in the name of profit and pleasure and greed. And then parts of the left are so animated by this blind and so-called anti-imperialism that, well, the United States is starving Cuba, and it's all United States' fault that everything's crappy in Venezuela. We'll talk to my ex-girlfriend who's from Venezuela and her kids. They'll tell you what's going on. It wasn't American foreign policy. In fact, American corporations were actually boosting Venezuela. And that I was told even by a hardcore Trotskyite who came back in the United States after living in Venezuela, kind of disillusioned with communism. So my answer is it's going to take a huge catastrophe. I'm sorry to say that. This country is so divided that it could even be this country will split up in different republics. One will be a people's Stalinist republic on one side. The other one will be the second. Then the next one will be the Third Reich nightmare hellhole, the other socialist dystopia. And then you'll have Teabaggerstan, which, like, corporate oligarchs will, just rape the common people. And then hopefully we'll have people like us. And then we'll have strongly guarded borders against those countries.
Well, I tell you, this is the thing that keeps me up at night, is because what we have done in this country over the last at least 40 years, I mean, it goes back even further than that, is that we're pulling the joist out from underneath our house to patch holes in the wall. I mean, eventually the house has got to fall in. Like, our economic positions, our military positions, our lack of social cohesion by a variety of factors. It really does beg the question, is there any, I mean, obviously something's going to happen. I mean, economic collapses happen pretty much irregardless of what anybody does. It's just a progression of any type of free market. I mean, I definitely think that we have made our future crash way worse by a total lack of foresight. But, I think that this is what my biggest problem with the way the U.S. is right now. Because going back to Trump, because, I mean, who else are we going to talk about? When Trump got elected, one of the biggest arguments in favor of Trump is that Trump is a businessman that runs a successful business. I mean, maybe not so much success, but not the point. He runs a successful business, and he's this billionaire, and he's going to come in and run the country like a business. Well, here's the problem. A country is not a business. You can't run it like a business because, it's like this. Trump couldn't fire Nancy Pelosi as much as he would like to. Trump couldn't fire Fauci because he knew that he would lose all of his political capital with that move right there and probably get impeached over that somehow. Like, for the fourth time this time. but the point is, though, is that I've always hated this argument that we need a strong businessman to run this country efficiently. Well, look, the problem is business as the U.S. model of corporate capitalism is as short-sighted and narrow-minded an institution as you can get. It is, one of the things I love studying is how different countries' businesses have develop certain cultures in how they do things. Like Japan is one of the world's greatest examples of long-term, extremely long-term business models. They are planning 30, 40, 50 years into the future any given day. And it's, there's companies in Japan that are 500 years old at this point. I think, I was reading about this last night. I remember one of the car makers can trace its roots back to like the 17th century. But the point I'm getting to, though, is that it is extremely long-term business models that are set up to not immediate or take immediate gratification. But if you flip this over into the U.S. model, the entire U.S. corporate model is set up to maximize the shortest term possible profits, maximize short-term profits every time, in as short a time as possible. So they're not talking about 5 years or even a year. They're talking about, can we raise our stock profile by 3% by 2 months from now?
Next quarter.
Yeah, they don't give a shit how you get there. Like, it's just, we are going to do this. Now, if you've got to lay off half the workforce, pump up the bond or the stock price, do whatever you want to do it, but they don't care. It's short term. And our U.S. federal government, in a lot of ways, and it's one of these things of politics and money, mirroring each other, or politics and business mirroring each other, is that our government is set up on such a short-sighted, immediate gratification model that it's what's going to destroy us in the end. Because a government that is set up, I'm not saying the Japanese government's great. I'm just, for an example, a government that is set up to plan 30, 40, 50 years into the future is what steps now is going to help fix this problem then, is going to do way better in a financial collapse, a global pandemic, unforeseen conflict, than a government like ours. Who was it? Singapore had warehouses full of medical, respirators, masks, and other anti-aerial virus materials, because they had the foresight to know, well, East Asia has a lot of, medical airborne pathogens that seem to come around about once every 3 minutes. So their government set up a system that when a pandemic like COVID-19 showed up again, we already have warehouses full of crap to distribute to our people while the production lines spin up. But we didn't have any of that. Our government, you want to talk about unprepared. They weren't even out of bed yet when this happened. Like, they hadn't even got their morning coffee knowing what to do. When the rest of the world was sounding the alarms, our country was like, oh, it'll be fine. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it.
That's what Larry Kudlow was saying. We'll be over this. And then you had Jared Kushner saying to the states and the localities that, well, we can't give any more because this is the federal government's supplies and this is our stuff. And it just was such a shit show, the whole administration. Go ahead, Herschel.
Oh, no, it's great. And this is the thing that, like I said, is going to kill us, is that as we are drawing ever closer to the economic collapse that's going to probably destroy this country as we fundamentally know it, a point to be made to people listening to this is the economic collapse that is going to occur in the next 15 to 20 years is going to dwarf by orders of magnitude the Great Depression. Because in the Great Depression, it was a global event, but in a lot of ways it was more North America and Europe than it was, this new Great Depression that's going to hit when the collapse happens. You're talking about the most interconnected world trade system that we have ever seen in the history of humanity, with moving parts in every country, in every location, with stock exchanges and shipping and all other things, is going to collapse in on itself overnight. There's just going to be a day that we wake up and the money is not there, that we have hit a point that our debt sheet has become so unbalanced that our physical assets are worth so little that our money is basically just worthless paper. And what's scary about it is that the Great Depression, when it hit, the warning signs had been going off for months. something is going to happen. Something is going to happen. And people were starting to write about it even back then, that there was something going on in the financial system. And it just hit like a lightning bolt. And that's what's going to happen to us. And because our government is so divided, and because our government is so ineffective at doing basically anything at this point, I seriously doubt that we can even respond to the coming crisis, within 2 years. I think that 2 years of getting our shit together was kind of optimistic, and that's what keeps me up at night, because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what we're going to do, because we don't have that person that you can say, oh, they can fix it, or have any faith at all that anybody in Washington is even taking this threat seriously at this point.
Well, that's why it's going to have to take a mass movement, and that's going to have to coalesce and crystallize during a period of a mass economic depression and global war, which with Russia and China, because they're allies. I think that's what's going to have to happen. And ironically, Reagan's famous inaugural speech that government is always the problem, never the solution, as well as his other quip that I'm from the government, the most dreaded words are I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, the 7 dreaded words or whatever he called it. Ironically, that played into the hands of the enemy countries who, like Russia, like China, like the Soviets, Reagan claims credit for collapsing the Soviet Union, but they sort of collapsed and reposition their assets in spite of Reagan, not because of Reagan, and they took whole of government strategies. Sure, they had oppressive tyrannies, their economic performance vis-a-vis average people is questionable in many ways, but on the other hand, they are beating us on so many grounds. They are exploiting our weaknesses because they have whole of government strategies, and they have a different moral code than the average American, that they're able to get away with this. And the biggest thing is to weaponize in our divisions in this country, which historically has always been present in some form or another, and also the class polarization that's occurring in this country. And a lot of, the divisions that's spurred on by political extremists, as well as also pro-corporate talk radio. All of them really feed into this division, and it's going to take some huge life-changing event in this country I'm hoping that's going to coalesce people around positive leadership. And I look at people like us as being in the reserve, and we have to stay engaged. So in case there's an opening where people are looking locally for leaders, provided that we still have some level of communications open, then we can, hopefully step into the fore. But it depends on a lot of conditions during an economic depression and or war. How much are we going to be able to communicate with each other over the distance of miles, or are we going to have to revert more into our local communities and take leadership roles? And that's going to be very difficult decisions that that people like us who are very politically engaged, you guys are very politically brilliant minds, very knowledgeable and astute. That's all where we're going to, we're all going to have to, take it one step at a time like that. But I am cautiously optimistic in the long term, but in the near term and midterm, unfortunately, no. But I hope I'm wrong, and I could be wrong.
You got your bunker built yet, Alan?
No, I'm more of a hope and pray kind of guy. So, yes, it is a very depressing state. Basically, yes, China and Russia are looking for a war because they've said it over and over again. They're looking for a new world order built on their model. Okay? They are arming for war, and at the same time, we have allowed ourselves to deindustrialize our nation, make ourselves dependent on our enemies, and financialized our economy so much that if war breaks out, it's a disaster, as Nevin would say, as Nevin has said, it would be a disaster. Okay. And that would be likely the thing that would tilt our economy from, barely hanging on by a thread into free fall. This is what helps me sleep at night. The one kind of silver lining for this giant cloud.
Not vodka?
It is that I think somebody somewhere is a little more on the ball than we know or give them credit for. Because for the last several years, I've been seeing articles about how Congress keeps buying all of this military equipment. That, all of these people are like, oh, Congress is spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year on tanks and bullets and planes that even our generals are saying we don't need. Okay? So that is the reserve that I think that will save us. It is all of these things that we didn't need, that we have just been stockpiling in a warehouse, that we will be able to use to buy us time to rebuild our industry and rebuild an economy that works and hold off China and Russia long enough to do it.
How long do you think it would take? Realistically speaking, this is a question for both of you. How long do you realistically think it would take the United States economy to get to a point that it can compete militarily? I'm not saying that it's necessarily World War II, because we're definitely fighting a different warfare in today's world.
Right.
But obviously, at the moment, we're way behind the ball. Like, we could not produce at war scale at the moment. But
of course.
And I will say this: before World War II, we were in a similar position. It's trying to be a little bit more positive. Is the United States wasn't. It's not like on December 7th, 1941, the United States just flipped a switch and started producing 600 tanks an hour.
Nope.
Nope. It did take us till about 1943. Get to the point that, the U.S. war economy that everybody knows and loves, unless you're Germany.
Well, but the thing is back then we had enough of an industrial base to retool. We've lost a tremendous amount of our industrial base. That started to be a problem from a military point of view in the 1970s, where you had generals and admirals like Alden Slay, Caspar Weinberger, Reagan's Secretary of Defense, ironically, General Wickham and others were complaining in the 70s and 80s that we were deindustrializing so much that we could not fight a prolonged war with the Soviets and their allies in a new World War III. And that was back in the 80s under Reagan. Now, to top that off, we've also signed arms control treaties under Republicans and Democrats. One of the things I do agree with Trump on is getting out of the INF treaty. I mean, Gorbachev, remember him, the great humanitarian and peacemaker, Time Man of the Year award. While behind the scenes, he was building up Soviet nuclear missiles. And according to Colonel Ken Alibek, or Kanatyan Alibekov, who wrote the book Biohazard, where he revealed as a defector from biopreparat, that Gorbachev and Yeltsin were modernizing the Soviet Union's and Russian Federation's biological weapons programs and tipping them on SS-18 ICBMs, so Gorbachev and his successors were violating INF treaty, left and right. And what we have to do is going to require a new reconfigured government where a leadership, non-party-based leadership, you need a leadership class with a different culture, radically different than what we have now. What we have is what I would term political capitalists or political capitalism. They think of re-election. They think short term. They are reactive, not proactive. So to replace our system of political capitalism, you need a truly reconfigured political system that has an unswerving devotion to the public good and the national interest. That's what they need to be focused on. They need to be focused on how do we advance the interests of the American people? How do we be like parents to the American people? Like we love our children and we want to protect them and invest in them as best as we can and everything else. Make sure that children are maintained like a car by going to the doctor for their checkups and everything. That's how we have to think of, the new leadership class has to think of governing, and based on that, and not focused on all these identity politics and Dr. Seuss and all this other crap. Instead, we have to focus in on what is in the public interest and the national interest. And we could have a different discussion on what that exactly is. I kind of told you what it was already. You know, the national defense and maintaining domestic tranquility, which covers a lot of fronts outside of domestic security and domestic law enforcement, to quote the preamble of our existing Constitution. So that's what we need to do. With this new government, which would be, I hesitate to say, but frankly, we'll have to combine classical liberalism with an authoritativeness, if you will, to lack of a better term. That's going to have to, that could take like 10 or 20 years. It's going to require a nationalized Federal Reserve that's going to have to disperse credits to existing but declining industries. It's going to have to require a repeal of right to work and programs in place that will allow social mobility and will allow more of an equilibrium between employer and employee. Why? Then the appeal of domestic radicals of the left will decline because everybody's going to be, you know, happy. You know, that's how Bismarck did it. That's what FDR did. FDR was pooping his pants, you know, about domestic extremists, both fascist and communist, who both wanted to replace capitalism with extreme forms of state-controlled economy and outright authoritarianism. So this is what we have to do. We need to increase the nuclear shelf life of our nuclear weapons with the uranium. We have to, and Alan was pointing out about the issues with the PPEs and things of that nature, Singapore and whatnot. We have to stockpile critical reserves of PPEs, antidotes, you know, masks, everything else. So in case of war, bomb shelters, so American public can protect itself, because frankly, our most precious natural resource are our people of all ages, particularly our youth, our kids. I would also work to do a selectively free college program, selectively based on the science, technology, medicine, biology, teaching, and whatnot, so that we create a human talent pool, so that encourages innovation within industries that are directly related to the military efforts, and so we can develop and innovate new products. You know, and I would frankly hold hearings similar to the Buchanan Committee of the mid-1940s on the one hand, which explored the teabaggers and globalists, reactionary free market globalists, who were undermining the New Deal balance that balanced capitalism at that time. There were actually hearings that exposed Milton Friedman as a shill for the real estate lobby. A lot of people probably didn't know that. He was a propagandist for the real estate lobby opposing rent control laws, and he was a hired hand. God only knows which governments retained him after that, you know, to propound his free trade nonsense. He was a big bolster of trade and trade deregulation with the Soviet Union, Cuba, and China, by the way. Yeah, Milton Friedman, you know, Mr. Oh, I am against socialism and communism, trying to impersonate him, but whatever. So you got to hold hearings on those teabagger right globalists. And then on the other hand, because a lot of them, like Ron Johnson and that guy in Michigan, what's his name? He left the Republican Party, that libertarian Republican, oh gosh. He has like ownership in Chinese state corporations dealing with automotives, Justin Amash. So there needs to be hearings held on these people, and they need to be held accountable. We need sweeping campaign finance reforms. We need a total ban on lobbying and a total ban to reflect the tenor of George Washington's state farewell address. There has to be a ban on Americans serving as foreign lobbyists. I don't care whether it's for China, for Israel, for Indonesia, Japan, Cuba. Let their diplomats deal with advocating for their countries. That's what embassies and trade missions and their UN missions are for. Thirdly, I would hold internal security hearings on the left extremists and neo-Nazi and other racial nationalist extremists. I would look in their foreign connections and expose it all to the public for them to see. And this is where I disagree with depart from a lot of the good anti-communists like Jared Nyquist and Trevor Loudon. We have to address the root causes as to why these extremists are proliferating. We have to go to the roots, because when you look at what people like Danny Haifong, who's a radical leftist, or former neo-Nazis like the guy who founded the TWP, Matt Heimbach and Christopher Piccolini. I mean, we can debate, their motivations, but they all say the same thing. Their communities have been devastated by financialization and deindustrialization and lack of incentives, just like what happened in the Weimar Republic. You had austerity policies that pissed people off under the Weimar Republic, under the Social Democrats and the conservatives. And that gave people no hope, essentially. And that causes political polarization in the wrong way. So we got to address the root causes of why people are embracing more and more variants of socialism. It's a symptom of a failure of the system. And then another point I would add, I mean, I could add a lot, but I would also engage a commission to de-Reaganize and de-Clintonize the economy and reverse every form of crony deregulation that they've put in place. And I would also have a government news and radio channel to provide a counter narrative to that the Ben Shapiro's and the CNN, Clinton News Network, corporate Democrat Central, to give a counter narrative, because the only way that people are going to have their interests truly represented is through a partially centralized, strong state. It's the only way out of this. So in essence, we got to throw Vladimir Lenin in the garbage can, and we also have to throw Grover Norquist in the garbage can. We got to seal it up, call up the truck, and take it to the landfill and just throw it in there and bury it as a historical curiosity once and for all. And that's my way of dealing with. That's my very long-winded explanation on how to deal with this problem and what is needed. And that's pretty much it.
I don't think anybody's ever accused you of not having good ideas or not having short ideas, Nevin. No, and
these are complex problems, and
they are.
Require complex solutions.
Alan, what is your complex solution to this problem? Excuse me. Can you hear me, Alan?
Yeah,
I gotta get some water. I'll be right back.
It's ultimately a political question. We need political leadership with a better long-term ability to view long-term. How do you get there? And that comes back to the question at the very beginning, was what was I trying to do with the National Democracy Party, which was find the common ground and explain to people who have their issues why good policy affected them. Okay? It's the media and the politicians would like us to believe that we are too divided to function as a country anymore. I don't believe that. I think we need better leaders, and the issue is how to find them and actually get them elected. And I think that that's just part of what we're all trying to do with things like this, is educate people show them that they have more in common with each other than they think they do, combat the negative narrative that comes from the news in Washington, and start making changes in the small term. We don't have a lot of time, but we still have some time. I think we can do it.
You know, Alan, that's a good point too about there. When you're talking about the divisive nature of politics, I'm guilty of it. Is, you know, I have my days that I'm just absolutely pissed off about something, and I might mouth Republicans and I might mouth Democrats, and I'm talking about the voters here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It happens because I'll see something where, you know, like the Capitol riots, and it's just, you know, you think that, yes, I blame leadership, but at a certain point, you got to blame the people that are following the leader. And I do the same thing to Democrats because I cannot stand brunch liberals. I can't do it. They kill me. But one of the things I do make myself realize is, for the voters, the rank and file, the people at the bottom of the system, they're in the same place as me. They are, by and large, a bunch of people that have lost their ability to provide themselves a better life, that have witnessed the destruction of their hometowns, of their the jobs that they've historically done. You know, it's amazing to me, and it's one of the things that this interview has really kind of reinforces just how many people that I know and that are across this country went through the same crap. You know, Alan, you're from Michigan. You were in the capital of American auto manufacturing, and also plenty of other manufacturing, like you said, but definitely auto manufacturing. You know, and you got to see what happened when all the factories shut down, and the ripple effects in the local economies that are further reaching than even the most hardcore libertarian couldn't have realized at the time. And, you know, in my hometown, well, not my hometown because my town's 400 people, but in Fort Smith, the city local to me, you know, when them factories went, it destroyed everything. The entire balance of what kept the economy in the area going. Once it was gone, the social issues, you know, they followed like the plague. You know, in an area that was already heavily struggling with drug addiction and violence and so many other issues, were just magnified by the lack of income, the lack of any hope that tomorrow was going to be a better day. So this is what I would say to the skeptics, the Trump supporters, the Joe Biden supporters in the comment is that when I am discussing issues with politics in America today, I am nearly always referring to the establishment at the top of the system. Those people in Washington, those people in the state houses, those people running the bigger companies. Because at the end of the day, if we're all eating the same pile of shit, well, I'm not going to be mad at you. You know, a Trump supporter that is not as populist as me is not my enemy. You know, the guy that donated $500 million to various, you know, think tanks to help, you know, cut minimum wage or whatever, kill unions. That guy's who I'm against. That is the businessman that exported his company to China for, you know, $50.
Exactly.
You know, this is what I would think that all of us would be in agreement on, and I'm kind of going to talk to the audience right now, is that we have to find a way to look past the differences, and there are differences. You know, there would be social conflict even in the absence of the problems that we're talking about. It's people.
Absolutely.
You know, but what we have to do is find a way to reach these people, and this is why I like people like Alan Hahn. He has made it his mission to do something. Now, Alan, he said before the recording started, he wasn't delusional enough, and also during the interview, delusional enough to believe that the NDP was going to be challenging the Republicans or the Democrats one day. The USNP, the reason that we shut it down was because me and Nevin came to the same conclusion: is that, yeah, maybe over 20 years we could gain a few thousand members and make some small difference, but at the end of the day, political capital, you got to kind of spend it wisely. So what we're trying to do, all of us, And what so many other YouTubers and individuals across this country are trying to do right now is to wake people up to the fact that if we don't change, well, we're all going to lose it. It's not just, right now, guys in the Midwest, the South, and the inner cities, we're the ones taking it on the chin the hardest. But before long, it'll be everybody. This top-heavy empire that we've built is going to collapse, and it's going to take us all with it. And this is why it's so important to continue to be involved in politics in any capacity. Is better than to be. I hate people that is just like, well, nothing will ever change. It's all crap. There's nothing we can do about it. I might as well just go on with my life. It's like, I understand the nihilism. I get it. Trust me. There's a lot of days I have to remind myself why I dedicate so much of my time to trying to do what I believe. And this is where I would say that if you care, if you are a person that is politically minded, which everybody should be now, but let's be honest, most people aren't, do something, anything. I don't care what it is. Start a Facebook page for all I care. It's free. It doesn't take anything. Share some cool memes, share some news stories. I don't care. It's something. There's a capacity for anybody to use a certain skill set to do something. And yeah, there's only so much room at the top, but there's plenty of room at the bottom. And everything that we do now will pay off in some way eventually. Maybe it doesn't save the system, but maybe it makes it better. Maybe the crash isn't so bad. Maybe instead of 3 years into the crash, our country doesn't collapse. Maybe 3 months into it, we get our shit together and we do something, because there is a movement of people trying to do something. And it's all about awareness, and it's all about political activism. So, Alan, I know that we're getting, we're already an hour and a half into this. What would be your advice to somebody like your 24-year-old self, looking back now on all that you've done over the last decade? What would you say to these people that are testing the water of politics?
I would basically just reiterate what you just said, which is doing something now, even if it's not the exact right thing, is better than figuring out what the right thing would have been years from now and doing nothing between now and then. Do something. It is a giant boulder that needs to be pushed. And just get in there and push, and figure it out along the way.
Hey, if nothing else, you get to meet cool people. That's been one of my favorite parts of all of this since I've really gotten into politics. I've met all kinds of cool people.
Yes.
I agree. I've met a lot of good people near and afar in all levels of politics, whether it's CPA, NDP, this show and this project I've been working on with Herschell. I include Herschell as one of those cool people. We've all been you're welcome, very, very blessed and very fortunate in that respect. Even in Republican politics, I've met some really good independent thinkers, some of whom I still maintain touch with. I mean, we've all been very fortunate in this whole process. I couldn't agree with you guys more. And Alan, that was beautifully stated about doing something. Got to do something. Got to try.
Yep. All you can do is try.
Exactly.
Well, I'll tell you, I know we're about to wrap up. This is another one that they come to mind. There's a dude that I watch on YouTube. He is a armored vehicle military historian, a guy named the Chieftain, Nicholas Moran. He used to be an Irish Army. He was in the Irish Army and then transferred to the U.S. Army. He's a really cool dude. I'm not talking about just politics, just a cool dude. He had a video talking about officer training because he commissioned as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army in the tank battalion, or the tankers. He was a tanker in the U.S. Army. One of the things that he said when he got to OCS was, you didn't have to make the right decision, but they expected you to make a decision.
That's right.
Do something. When you're getting shot at, don't just, lock into yourself and just do nothing, because that will always make the situation worse. Always. Mm-hmm. And I've that is one of the things, that little story that he was talking about. And he wasn't trying to do it to inspire people. He was just talking, kind of giving a walkthrough of, the video was about, should you commission into the U.S. Army? Like, should that be something you consider? But, that's such an important lesson for a lot of people that I found is that, like what we do, we're at 260 something likes on Facebook now. Thankful to every person that likes our page. By the way, you really helped me keep going. It's such a great thing when I open up my phone, I see somebody like the page. It like gives me a little bump in the day. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing something right. Mm-hmm. But to do something, make a decision. Maybe it's the wrong decision. Maybe it's the right decision, but you won't know until you're actually in it doing something. And who knows, maybe a person like Kyle Kulinski, I always like talking about him because he's a guy that basically started from nothing with no real funding, he didn't have a lot going for him in the grand scheme of things as compared to somebody, maybe from a wealthier family with better connections. And, Kyle has made himself into what I would consider, at least in the conversation, as the top of the progressive media outlets or media personalities. I mean, I think that it'd be hard to argue that he's not up there right now. But I am hopeful. And we talk about it a lot on the show. We're all kind of, like on this show, we talked about all the crap that's wrong with this country. And trust me, there's no end to crap that you can find wrong with this country. But when I talk to guys like you, when I talk to individuals on the street just talking, and it does give me hope that, yeah, maybe our politics suck and our leaders are a bunch of incompetent morons. But there's a lot of good people that could be something. Mm-hmm. And it just takes a push. Sometimes it takes a jump. Sometimes it just takes a person finding the right person. Like maybe your job wasn't to be a great political leader, but maybe you were the person that inspired somebody else to get into politics. It's exactly. I could give 1,000 stories of something like that happening. But in an effort to not drag this on forever, I figured I would ask if either one of y'all want to say something before we log off of here.
I think we've said all there is to say.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered a lot of ground. I mean, I have to agree. With people that I've met at work over the years, friends, there is, as I mentioned in, one of my comments earlier, one of the good things is not only is the country, the masses on our side on a lot of issues based on polls, but there are, from the quote unquote common man and common woman, there are a lot of very brilliant minds out there who follow politics, who follow history, whether they had the professional training or academic background or not. And they really have a lot of good ideas and a lot of solutions. A lot of average people are governed by something called common sense and patriotism.
That is a foreign concept to Washington.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that wave by decades ago there. But the fact of the matter is there is a lot of good in this country too, as I kind of all of us have alluded to earlier. And in times of crisis, I'd like to think that a lot of good people will come forward, men and women, all races, colors, and classes, to steer the ship, into better waters, so to speak. And look, historical miracles have happened. Look what Israel faced in 1948, 1949, poorly armed Israel. They fought off 9 Arab countries with superior weapons? Look at our founding fathers. I mean, granted, they had support from the Prussians, the Hessian mercenaries, and the French, but our Continental Army faced a lot of odds. I mean, you look at the United States during World War II. I mean, technically, the Axis powers and the Soviet Union was kind of a quasi-Axis member because of the German-Soviet non-aggression pact. I mean, Soviet Union, Japan, Italy, and Germany. I mean, the United States was pretty powerful industrially, but I mean, those powers had vastly much more industrial capital. But, we won that war. Granted, we were in a better situation. But the point is historical miracles do happen. And the American people, as much as our country is divided and really is in deep doo-doo and really could be defeated. At the same token, I would caution our enemies at the same time, if you're listening to this broadcast, you also don't want to wake up the sleeping giant either. That's the other part. And also the Second Amendment also is a very helpful part of our Constitution, of which at least some of us do partake in, and we'll just leave it at that. So there is that flip side too as well. Even if the government military is defeated by Russia and China, we're going to be a very difficult country to subjugate. And I think you can have a lot of good people, strong leaders, men and women coming to the fore. And that's all I have to say. So there are many positive things about this country, and that, and my anger and my passion comes out. I know it's because I know we all love our country. We love our communities. We are attached to the soil of this nation. We want to see our nation, both as a collection of individuals and as a collective unit, to do well, to be the best nation possible. Not in a xenophobic way, but in a very forward-thinking way, where at the same time we have the capacity to protect ourselves. So I wanted to end on that note. And I wanted to thank you, Alan, for joining us. I think this has been a very incisive and very detailed and good interview, and we hope to have you back if sometime in the future, if you'd like to come on board. Yeah. And awesome. And Herschell, thank you again for being a great co-host as always, and throwing a little humor here and there. You gotta make a very intense topic. My rule of thumb is I always like to welcome a sense of humor and some laughter in that, because this is a very intense topic, and you got to break the ice with some humor. That's one of the rules on this show, is you got to throw in a few bad jokes or sarcastic jibes, even if they're corny, because that's a hallmark. If anything else, the females in the audience, they like senses of humor from guys. So, that's like one of their rules. But you got to laugh a little, and it's been fun. And I want to wish everyone out there, thank you for joining us. Be sure to share this video, like our YouTube page, visit the Patriotic Populist Facebook page, or my own political page, NatPop, short for National Populist. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Stay safe, enjoy, keep on smiling, keep on laughing, and keep on praying. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.